Alright guys, this is the tutorial for the portfolio exercise, the final exercise here of the semester. So you're looking at a draft of that. Essentially what I'm asking you to do is to take each exercise from this past semester, so projects 1 through 4 and including 5, so we'll see working screenshots of the portfolio, and basically use that as the content to create a portfolio. The idea here is that you'll learn a new tool, which is InDesign, and you'll also be somewhat acquainted with how to compose a portfolio and how to use this tool to achieve that. You have to do that to enter your professional programs, whether it's architecture or interior design. So hopefully this is will help you for creating that and also enhance what we're doing in media and architecture. So the overall idea here is to confront the thing that a lot of us have to do as designers. At times we have to show our work, and a lot of times we show that through portfolio. Now oftentimes I think now that ends up being online, some online service. So whether you use Issue or some other web service for a PDF file, this will still apply. Not as much, I guess, if you're creating a website, although compositionally you still have to think about it. So in any case, it's still a valuable tool to have for you to start to think about what a portfolio means. And so hopefully this is the beginning of that. For this, we'll be following a particular compositional strategy that was developed by Massimo Vignelli. And so there's a short video, very short video, that references that. So that's one of the steps, is to go ahead and view that video and use that as part of the compositional strategy for the overall portfolio. So the objectives really is to create a portfolio of your work from each exercise this semester, from media and architecture. This is to include a cover page, table of contents, and exercise spreads. So basically layouts for each exercise. Each exercise spread is to be a full two-page spread. So essentially what that means, and I'll just open up an example here. And page display. So this is an example of a layout using that strategy. So this is all for one particular exercise. In this case, it's exercise 1, ideas in motion. So the idea is that you'll create an overall spread, one spread for each exercise. So exercise 1, I didn't create all of them, but just a few here as an example. Okay, so not only just the final results, but also include potentially raw images, manipulated images, screen captures, so you basically demonstrating that you've used the tools, and an image of the final product for each exercise. So whether that's a PDF file for a photo montage, or an image, a photo that you've taken of one of the models, you'll include that as well as the final results. The portfolio is to be formatted and submitted digitally, as well as having the ability to quickly format it for print. I believe it's the case for architecture and ID that they still require physical prints to be submitted. So this then, as a PDF file, you have to think about kind of the page sequencing to make sure the fronts and backs are all coordinated, but these should be easily, using the strategy, would be easily printed at, whether at the print shop or whatever print shop you decide to use. So the basic steps then are to create a new document, to modify the units and adjust the margins. I'm using, in my example, 1/4 inch margin. I believe the default is 1/2 inch. You could use either, but I'm going to be looking at a 1/4 inch. That's just the way I divided up and created the grid. You can find this adjustment under the layout menu. Create new layers for images, text, and guides. So layer management, again, that's a continuation. To watch the video, again, the link is right here, with messing with Vignelli on book layouts and grids, using how to use a master layout page to create layout grids, using guides. That again is about the Vignelli strategy. Create a cover page, table of contents, and exercise spreads. Use a full 2-page spread for each exercise. And then placing images, which is essentially drag and drop. And these will be linked images. They won't be embedded in the file, but they'll be linked. So you want to make sure wherever the images are that you drag and drop in there, either you collect those and put them in a new folder, and those are the ones specifically for the portfolio, or you don't move them. Because if you move them, or if it's from one drive or the other, then the InDesign is going to lose its link, mapping link, and won't be able to find that image, and you have to refine the image and replace it. Create descriptive text, and using the flow text tool from one text box to another in each exercise spread. So there'll be descriptive text and title text for what the project was or the exercise was, and the title for your specific exercise. And all images and text must conform to the grid in some manner. And you'll see that the proportions of 11 by 17 don't exactly work with the grid that I created, and so you have to be creative. You know, it's not entirely a restriction, but somehow you have to be able to use that grid. This is an example. This doesn't necessarily use the grid. The top and the bottom do, but this goes off of the grid, but still it's overall a clean, composed piece. And so I took some liberties from the grid, but you definitely want to reference that grid. Let me just go back. Workflows, basically design communication, right? We're communicating our work, and also portfolio development and composition. Okay, so creating a new file. So if you see here, I've already have a file going, but I'll go through the steps to create a new file. So essentially we'll go into new document, and right away I'm going to change the units to inches so I can monitor the size of the overall sheet. 8.5 by or 11 by 8.5, the landscape defaulted here. It might be a little bit different. You might have to modify that, so just make sure that you're aware of that. 12 pages. Here's the toggle for portrait and landscape. I do have facing pages. I have 12 pages. You can easily add or subtract spreads or layouts, so I think I just have 12 here to start. And start at 1. The rest of this is, I think, essentially fine. So I'll say, I'll go ahead. Well, here you can make modifications to the margins right away. So like I mentioned, I was using a quarter inch, and this is mostly for more specific printing, the bleed, the inside, the slug, all of that. I don't usually work with that very much. I don't know if that's essential. If you want to get in and tinker with all of those adjustments, please feel free. It depends on, especially the center, if they're facing pages or dealing with full page layouts, how it's going to be bound and all of that. So those are some things, I guess, to consider once you think a little bit more closely about binding and so forth. And then you could modify the inside binding. And if you want to have different margins, of course, you can just unlink this, all settings the same, and then you could have a different inside margin versus the top, the bottom, and the outside. But for this, I'm going to leave this all uniform and click Create. Okay, so here to the right, you can see have the pages that are laid out there. What I want to do now is just go ahead and set up my layers. So that's the default layer 1. I'm just going to set up a text layer, And again, the interface of InDesign is very similar to Illustrator and also somewhat similar to Photoshop. So we have the selection tool, the direct select tool, we have text tool here, a line tool, a pen tool. A lot of these others I don't use, I guess, a lot. You can use a color theme kind of eyedropper there. And of course the pan tool and the zoom tool. This then is the fill, and this background with the kind of the open square is the stroke color. So you can, if you get into creating shapes a little bit more and so forth, then you could make some modifications there. You can make shapes here, of course, just like you would with any other. And then right away when you create that, it's still selected, and I could start modifying the stroke, whether I want that bigger or smaller. If I wanted to have a fill, I could create a fill there. So that's all very similar to Illustrator. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. Okay, back to layers, and I will create a guides layer, and I will create an image main layer. I'm going to create a image background, just in case I want to put an image in the background, and I don't want to really stumble over selecting, right? I can just turn off the layer accordingly. So that's the way I have. Again, the order matters here, so I want to make sure to arrange these accordingly. I think that's all fine. Okay. So that's looking pretty good. Now you notice here in pages, so I'll just move this out a little bit more. You see pages, layers, and links. So pages here, these are all my layouts. So if I double click to this, you see I'll get to that layout. Again, my zoom is all the same as Illustrator. So if I hold down my Alt key, I can, with my scroll wheel, zoom in and out. If I double click on the hand tool, it'll fill the view area with that. The workspace also I have here, Essentials. You may have to make a modification if you have a touch screen. It may default to that, and you'll have to go into and modify that. Here's touch, where the icons would be a little bit bigger, but you can move away from that. I prefer to use a mouse and everything, so I use the Essentials in this case. So pages, then we have layers, and then we have the links. Now the links will come into play once we start placing images. We'll also see here that it says a master. And so basically it's a master sheet. So whatever I do on these sheets right here will end up becoming part of these others. And that's where I'm going to start working on. I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller. And I can still get to layers and links that way. And swatches and stroke, all that, those are there. Again, very similar to Illustrator. So up above we have the master layer. So what I want to do is make sure that I'm on my guides layer. I can go make sure I'm on the master layout here and start creating the grid. So I'm going to zoom in to this sheet first. Now I know that this is 8.5 by 11, right? So if I take, again, I'm just go right to the rulers here and drag this over, and so 5.5 would be the center of that. And so if I wanted a 1/4 inch, so basically I'm looking at a 1/4 inch space for the grid itself, and then we have a 1/2 inch there. I can just go ahead and start placing these other lines there, so it's a 1/4 inch. There we go. And if I wanted, I could delete this one with my select tool. I can still select this and delete it or what have you, but I'll leave it for now. And then I'll come over here And for whatever reason, let's see, well, this one worked out. On the other file, maybe I did something a little bit different. My margins weren't right at 1/4 inch. So I can just Control Z, get rid of that. So what I want to do is find the exact center between this line and this line. So these ended up being 1/4 inch, nice and clean. So what I can do to achieve that is I can just change the origin. So if I grab this corner, I can drag it around. I'm going to change where 0, 0 is in terms of X, Y. Now it's right at this point. Then I know that this then is 5 1/8. Then I can know that basically I have 2 1/2 and 1/16. This should be the center of that. And then I should then be able to get to 1/4 either side. So yeah, we'll have 1/8 there and 1/8 there. Oops. Move that over. There we go. And then I'll do that for this as well. If I wanted, I could just recenter this, take this 0, move it over there, and again, it's going to be the same measure. And I don't know, sometimes I do it's just a little bit easier to start working. I could zoom in a little bit more if I wanted to get really exact. Looks like that was just a little off. Oops. There we go. And then 1/8 and 1/8. Oops. 1/8. All right. Okay, so now we have that created. Now, so I'll have to do the same thing for this other master sheet as well. Now, I'll have to do, and I'll recenter this to here. This is at 8 1/2 by 11, so it's a 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. This is going to be 8 inches, so I know the center should be 4. But if I go ahead and drag and hold down my Control key, see here it's just on the one page, but if I hold down my Control key, it would be for both layouts, so I can kind of expedite a little bit. And then I would lay it out the same way. So that's a 1/4 inch, so I got 1/8 inch. Oops, see, I didn't hold that down, so it's, gotta make sure I do that, hold my Control key down. Okay, and then I would divide this in half and create the grid. Keep working that way. This looks like it's a little bit off over here, so I'd have to go in and, well, I guess that's okay. Maybe just a little off. Anyway, you can get in and fine tune this. It's just basically dragging these lines around. And there you would have it. Now if I go back to, just don't click this, okay. So you'd finish off for this other side as well, to go through the same steps, and then go through the same steps for creating this at 2 inches, and then your 1/4 inch space on either side. Hold your Control key down to do that. V, need my selection tool. And it's really these spaces that I'm looking for. I'm kind of eyeballing it now, but you'd want to get in there and make sure that you have the right measurements for that. This one's a little bit easier because it's all even. So once you've completed laying all those out, so you have them going horizontally and then all vertically, go back to pages. So now once I go to my first layout here, let's say this first page, or whichever page, now those are automatically there for each of the layouts. So I've automatically formatted all of those using this master sheet. This is also good if you have some kind of common, whether it's like a banner or something like that that you want for each overall layout, and it's pretty handy then to use these master sheets. So then you're kind of set up to start working here, more or less. Now, one thing that I wanted you to do, and I'm going to move to this other file that I already started to work with here, and I basically went through the same steps. So if I go to my master layout, and I got rid of the center lines, I just selected those and deleted them. So then I just have the grid spaces there. Visually it's a little less, I guess, active. So I went through the same steps. Then I went to the first page right here to create a cover page. And so this is where then you would start to lay that out. But again, make sure, I think before or right after you create this grid, make sure to watch the Vignelli video. Just go through some examples, and you can kind of see the strength and something like that, at least as a starting place for portfolio composition. So that's really important. Okay, so basically I'll just walk through the steps in terms of how I created this. Now I make sure that I'm on my right layer, and this I just used text. So I'm just going to move this to the side, move that to the side, and show you how I went about that. I just went, so I'm on the right layer, went to my text tool, and I could, click the dog ear is here as well, so I can go along a path and do some of those things that I can do in Illustrator, but I'm not necessarily going to get into that. It's going to be pretty clean, and I want to work with this grid, and so all I did was drag this out, and it's nice once you have the guides kind of set up that it starts to kind of snap to those lines, so that makes it fairly handy. So I just started typing 243 semester portfolio, and then I guess I put work at the bottom there. Okay, so I'm not a fan of this font at all. And the font that I use, I tend to use sans serif fonts, nice and clean. I don't want a font that's going to get in the way of reading the actual images. I want the images to be, the work, the actual design work, to be the active, kind of stimulating, visually objects on the sheet, not the text necessarily. I want the text to kind of be background. So I tend to use fairly clean text. Vignelli actually created Helvetica text, but that's not one of the options. Otherwise, I'd select that. But I used this Calibri. I don't know. It's one that I've been using. And then you have different options here for text. And so this should be familiar. This is similar just to word processing. And the layout that I used was this. And then I just, so it's justified to the left and right. And I bumped up the size of it a little bit. I don't want a space there. I think I had this, and instead of the regular, I selected the bold, and I don't know, maybe that's a little bit bigger, so I went to 24, let's say. I wanted this to be kind of be in the center, so I went down a bit. You just kind of have to work with the spacing and everything to get this to work. I was at 24, so I'll select 24, and I think that was also bold. So bring it back. So I could start to finesse this a little bit. This space isn't quite as big as that other one, or the one up above, and so I was just kind of playing around a little bit with some of the spacing here. Enter, if I go back, I wanted this really to hug that area, and I could just create different text boxes for this. So if I wanted, I could say, okay, well, I don't want to mess around with doing it that way, and so maybe what I'll do is just copy and paste this, move that there, get into this, and delete everything up to that, and just make that its own text box. Then I can put this right in the middle, backspace, So I don't know, this is just the way you could, I didn't do it for the other way, I actually played with the spacing, but this is probably better so I can really center it the way I want to. Yep, and then, I don't know, maybe I'll just copy, paste that, since that's the font that I want to use for the bottom. Work. Yeah, so that's probably a better way. I don't know, I put it in the middle, it doesn't have to be in the middle. You could subdivide this grid a little bit more, although, I don't know, it starts to get really tiny then. So that's really up to you. And I was kind of playing around with different options for where I put my name on the cover, and I ended up, this was just a regular text box, and I just rotated it. I don't know, I had it here in this space for a while, and I didn't like that. And so this is just something you just work with. Try in one spot or the other. I should learn how to spell architect. Ah! Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, I don't know, I had it here, and I really like that there, so then I use this. So again, I just rotated that to create that. So I just had to create it like this, and I rotated it, and it was justified to the left and right, so then I just stretched it to fit into that grid, so it'll snap here. Snap there. So that's basically how I created it. I don't know, that's up to you. You could also bring in some other image if you wanted to as part of the background, let's say. Maybe it's from one of these others. Geez, I don't know. So I just literally, I'm going to escape from this. Let's see, escape. What I should do first is make sure that I'm on the right layer, image background, open this up. And these are just from the other example files that I had. So here's a PNG, so I just dragged it right over here, and see the little plus turns on. And then when I click on InDesign, I get this box. So basically it wants me to drag a box. So maybe I'll just go to the outside there and drag this box. So then automatically I get the image there, and I can adjust it. Now, when you place images in InDesign, it's different than Illustrator in that there are a couple different adjustments. One adjustment, let me just move it to the side here so you can better see. Right there. One adjustment is this rectangle that I'm manipulating right now. You notice it's kind of cropping it out, because once I placed it and set that original size, it kept the actual image of that size, but then this is really just framing, almost like a framing window to that image. Now, there are different adjustments that I could work with this that are right up above. They automatically show up. So fill frame proportionally, so that just basically centers it and gives it its width. I want to fit the image in there, so that's the overall image. Then you can get to some other options, but I can also just start manipulating this. So say for example I wanted it to be in the background the way I had it. Maybe I'll just turn text off, so it's a little bit easier to see, and I'll go to this outside part of the grid just for kicks. Okay, so then I'll say fit proportionally or fit the image, and that looks fine. Now if I click this circle in here, you see now I get this yellow selection, and I can actually then move the image around and scale it from here. So if I wanted it to be a little bit bigger and catch a certain part of that image, and I can just kind of pan around and position it just how I'd like. So that's the framing, the window that I'm seeing through to the image, and then the actual image is this big right here. The yellow might be hard to see, but it's a yellow outline right there. And then I can click off of it. So I don't know, maybe I like that. So that's kind of an adjustment. That's a little bit different than Illustrator. So I can also select this, and up above here is transparency. So maybe I just want it to be really washed out, just like a subtle hint of some action in the background. Maybe that's good. Bring back the text. Yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm happy with that. Just a little texture in the background. So that's basically the routine in terms of setting all of this up. Now you'll notice if I go into links, well, there's several in there already. I'm going to go to the example here. Pages, there we go, pages. So if I go back to that same image and I brought it in and make a box, it's going to stay proportional to the original image here. Right when I drag this out, let me see if I hold my control key down. That doesn't do anything different. Okay, so that's proportional to the image, and then I could resize this and then go back to some of these adjustments to have it fill out, what have you. But then you'll notice in links that here's the image that I just placed. And it gives me all the information here in terms of where it is, so it has a path, it knows where to find it. It has other information about it. So if I, in my folder here, if I decide to move this somewhere else or rename this folder, this mapping would be broken. This image, it would show as a broken link and kind of a degraded, kind of just a preview image of that. And so you'd want to go and find the actual image and replace it. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to go back to this other. So again, that's basically the routine that we're working with here. The table of contents, the way I created that, again, I don't even have a background image, and maybe I'll use this one again, copy, and I just control C, and then I'm going to control V. There it is. I don't know, maybe it slips over or something. And yeah, I don't know, something like that, just a subtle something in the background. I don't know if I really like that, maybe it goes the whole way. Again, this is just a lot of trial and error, compositionally, and working with the grid a little bit different. You can see here I'm not always obeying this in-between space for the grid. Sometimes I'll go overlaps so there can be a frame of texture with this image. Yeah, I don't know, maybe something like that. If I do something like this, I want to make sure that the text is really legible, so this one gets really, really diluted, and so 10% seems to be fine, at least on screen. And these are on-screen portfolios, so that's basically what we're working with. So same way I created this table of contents here, you'd want to go ahead and give these their proper names. You don't have to list exercise 1 and 2 and everything, but I think this one was ideas in motion. And I'm just space barring from the justified to kind of push it over a little bit. So again, compositionally, just kind of working with it a little bit. So it would be the pages after a table of contents, 1 through 2, ideas in motion, 3 to 4, defrag. And you know, if you wanted to start with table of contents or this page over here as page 1 and work through it that way, that's fine. This is just the way I decided to do it here. So a table of contents that tells us what's in the portfolio, a little bit of introduction in terms of your thinking. Maybe it's an inspirational image, maybe I don't know, maybe it's just something that why you got interested in architecture and so forth. So that's just something to think about. And then the rest of these layouts are pretty much the same. It was really just a matter of dragging and dropping these images. So I'll go to Ideas in Motion folder. And so all I did here, again, I want to make sure I'm on image main layer. And so I just used some of these raw images that were part of it. This is part of what the building blocks to the exercise that I used, at least the example that I used. So I went to, oops. there. And I'll resize this to fit into that grid. Just make sure that this is snapping right to the guide. This one too. And I just got that to fit proportionally, fit the frame so it fills it out. And then I brought it back in terms of the transparency. I wanted this to be the punchier image over here, the final piece. So I think maybe 50% or something I used. It's up to you again, but it's about, you know, understanding the elements of visual literacy, how the eye is going to track across the page, and then how that, you know, kind of feeds into the main focus, which in this case is the final piece here. Now you see that this, and I'll just go ahead and replace this in the final piece. It doesn't fit in the grid really. So I go back, File for Print, I'll bring my PDF file in. Yeah, I'll just drag that there. So if I really wanted to get this to fit in the grid, or even if say horizontally, it starts to cut out some of the imagery, some of the text potentially at the bottom here, and so you know, for this I didn't really want that to happen. So what I ended up doing is just letting it kind of be what it is, and then I grab that circle in the middle, hold my shift key down, just move it over there, and I just left it at that. I could modify this if I wanted to, it doesn't really matter, I just slipped it over. So horizontally it starts to work, at least for me. So again, the grid is kind of it's a good starting place, but it depends on how you start to work with it. You can see here for this image, I just started, you know, I just took this whole horizontal band, let that diagram information kind of fill out there. Here's a little kind of a smaller vignette, and then I started to work with the text. And so I'll recreate this text just so you can see how that was created as well. So I'm on the text layer, and then I will go to the text tool, and all I did was I just drag the box just like you would with the image. And again, this is the same as I showed previously for the table of contents on the cover page. So whether I wanted to put exercise 1 or not, maybe I do in this case. A lot of times too, once I create this and get the fonts the way I want to, I'll probably copy and paste it so I can match the font and the size for these other layouts, and then just modify the text. But in this case, let's see, I just got to remember what this was. Calibri 12 looks like I had, and it's the regular. And I just used all caps for the title, so that kind of sets it apart from the rest. The rest wouldn't necessarily be that. Okay, and enter. And so then the other thing that I can do here, if I right click in this box, there's an option to fill with placeholder text. So if you just wanted to see how the text would be in that area, you can do that, and get the formatting to be the same. I have to see Control Z, and I want it to be there, and then fill placeholder text. Well, I have to select all this. There we go, to fill that out. Okay. So one of the other things that I wanted you to do is to work with flowing text from one text box to the other. And so there's a way in InDesign to very easily connect this box to another text box. So I'll just go ahead and create the other text box. Drag my rectangle, there it is on the grid. And then if I go here to the select tool, there's this little box that's right there. If I click it, you can see this little symbol shows up. Basically what that means is I can connect the text to this. So for example, if I started to hit enter, as you can see, it flows right into that other text box. So if I kept typing, it would be continuous text. So that's a nice thing to work with. So for example, if I wanted maybe a little space there, work with that. And maybe for now I just wanted to fill it with placeholder text. And so you'd want to fill this in with specific text. You know, the tools that you learned, the ideas that you were working with, other things that were going on while you were learning the tools and so forth, and have it be a discussion of that, both, you know, the technical aspects of how you work through the exercise, and also conceptually how you started to work with whatever ideas that you were working with. So make sure that this is specific. But at a quick pass, if you just want to kind of block things out, it's nice to use that fill in with placeholder text just to kind of see how things start looking. Let's see, create descriptive. So that's basically it. Those are the major tools. And, you know, I don't know, I was kind of working out this. I like this nice and clean sort of look here. This is starting to look kind of, I don't know, blocky. So maybe I'll just clean this up a bit. I guess I started liking that horizontal action. So maybe I'll bring these two boxes in that way. I leave this, I left this, these are all, again, I just drag and drop those, they're all in the right layer. They're dropped to 50% opacity. This one I left it at full opacity, so then you could understand that, you know, part of what it was being dealt with here was developing ideas from a fragment like this, from a building or what have you. So I left that being punchy. Again, high contrast is going to draw the eye, so the eye is perhaps going to be drawn here and perhaps go through the text, wash over the texture. It's kind of more background. It's kind of framing these other elements, and then you move into the main piece. You know, and you could fill, if this was a, you know, a proportional image to this, I may leave it the full size. But I don't know, it's pretty active, and this is just, it's very personal, you know, how you want to work with this. I might just go ahead and dial it back a little bit and get it to fit in there, and I don't know, maybe I could leave it in the center, I guess, and that could be something. If you wanted to see kind of how things are looking beyond like all the guides and everything, a quick way you can do that is then just toggle off your layer. Now you still see these other boxes and so forth. So the guides I had turned off. The other way you can do it is go into View, and you go into Screen Mode in Preview. That's basically going to show you how the composition is going to look without any of the guides or the frame boxes or anything. They still kind of show up once you cursor over them, but you can see how the composition is working. And I don't know, maybe that's okay. Maybe I'm good with that. I can just go back to screen mode, normal. And again, just continue through all of these. You know, this one's moved to the side. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'd center it again, just like the one previous to this. And so these are just a few examples of layout, but same steps. You know, I'm just making the text boxes and placing the images. You would also, again, include the screenshots, your print screens for using various tools. And so you would include that as part of these. And you don't have to include every little bit, but the idea is to kind of cover what it is that you worked with throughout, and also demonstrate that you got to become familiar with certain tools. And also demonstrate the idea that there are different workflows for achieving different things, and that's really what the course is about. Okay, so once you get through all of the layouts, the quickest way I found, there's several ways to get a digital file or PDF file out of this. The cleanest way, that's not finicky much, is just to go into File and Print. And then you want to make sure that all your settings, so I have Adobe PDF selected. Make sure you can go into Setup and get in a little bit deeper, or set up here, let's say letter, that's correct. That's landscape, 8.5 by 11, good to go. And so all of these seem to be working pretty well. What I often do is just, if that's right, and I see that I'm at 100%, I don't want the scale to fit or anything, I'll just print a draft and just see what that looks like. These are earlier drafts, so I'll just 243, save. Again, save your work, just like always. Make sure that you're saving along the way with an external hard drive or what have you. Okay, so, that's how it started coming out. The background image, I don't know, it's okay. It adds a little bit. I like it here, maybe not so much here. Because then this is kind of stands out a little bit. It doesn't have the background on it, and this is kind of part of the action in the background, and maybe I'd want to clean it out here, actually. I probably would fragment it out, make sure the table of contents was just on its own, and then maybe image here, image there, just to kind of frame it. Anyway, that's a compositional thing. But I'm looking at these not as full layouts. I'm looking at them as individual sheets. So I can go into View, and then I can go into Page Display, Two-Page Viewing, and we can see that things are a little bit off here, right? Especially, and you have to think about this if you're going to print it, because if you're going to actually print this and make it a physical object, you have to think, okay, the cover is on one page, the back of the cover has nothing. So what you'd want to do is go into your thumbnails, and sometimes they'll do this for you automatically. You have a cover sheet, but I always just like to cover those bases beforehand. I can go ahead and insert a blank page. I can say I want it after page 1. Okay, so that's my first layout. Then I would know that this would be printed, and then this would be the back of that one. Then I'd get to this, and this is incorrect, so I need another, I have to insert another one. And for, let's see, before, sure. For the purposes of this, though, let's see, for architecture 243, you can just, yeah, this would be fine, and then that's fine. This is where it should be, and that should set up the rest of them to be paired up correctly. So here we have ideas in motion. That's that overall layout. You can start to kind of see, I'll just move this over, the dialed back transparency, just kind of muted some of these images, and I don't know, maybe that's okay, maybe not, but then allows this to be nice and saturated, and so you can kind of focus on that. Maybe it's a little small, but again, that's part of kind of going through this process and thinking about it compositionally. And then thinking about each layout, do I like it framed like this? Do I push things around? Again, that's trial and error. That's the iterative process. So you can be a designer about it. Right now, it was set, InDesign was set to only print the pages that had objects on them. Didn't print any blank pages, so that's why you didn't see the rest of the layouts printed. So they wouldn't be printed until they were populated, and in the print settings, you can toggle that. Print blank pages right there. So you can kind of see how it would be laying out. So that's essentially it. Then you would just save this file and upload it to your student work folder accordingly in the exercise 5 folder, and that's pretty much it. Look to the brief that will be uploaded shortly if it hasn't already. Make sure you're looking at the particulars in terms of what is required day to day, and make sure that you're keeping pace with this. It's towards the end of the semester, other studio work is starting to ramp up a little bit. I'm sure you have other classes that are ramping up, so make sure you're starting to kind of chip away at this. Follow the schedule in terms of setting up the file, setting up the guides. Once you have that, that's a big step in a good step forward, let's say. And then setting up the layers, that should go pretty quick, and starting to place and compose and starting to work with it. So just to make sure to monitor your time with everything else, and make sure that you're using this as a draft, kind of a dry run for your particular program submittals for application, and work with composition. Work with what you think might work and what might be compelling. Right? You want to make sure that the reviewers, whoever reviewing the portfolios, are captivated somehow. Right? And we do that through imagery. We do that through texture. All the things that we've been working with in this course, in addition to the content itself. So Make sure you're highlighting the most successful aspects of your work. And good luck. All right. Thanks, guys.